After I accepted my autism, I looked back at my childhood and I could see it pretty clearly. My hyperlexia causing me to have to switch back to private school because I could already read in the first grade. My difficulty making friends and needing to get pulled out of class to learn social skills. Being sent to clean the den and being found organizing the movies in first alphabetical order and then color coordinating them. My vocal tics, oral fixation, and phobia of peanut butter, which are all sensory processing indicators. Even my commitment to the color pink or my drive for musical theater as hyperfixations. So I started to play a game called How Did They Miss the Autism? And actually, I answered that question pretty quickly. There are two problems I see with mental health diagnoses. Because of the way that symptoms show up when your brain functions differently than anticipated, for a very long time, a lot of these symptoms were counted as personality traits or quirks or moral failures even, instead of the way we acknowledge physical ailments. It is hard to tell the difference between a bad attitude and an inability to regulate your emotions, between being lazy and struggling with executive dysfunction. Our bodies only have a few ways to communicate things with us, and so often we don't adequately have words to explain the nuance of the difference between certain things. A favorite example of mine is that anxiety and excitement often feel the same, but we can acknowledge the difference between those feelings because of the context. You're not excited that everyone hates you. That's anxiety. And you know the difference, but if how you describe it is as extra energy and a fluttering in your stomach, well, that could sound like someone else's experience of excitement. People often relate to each other based off of an assumption that other people's internal experiences match. And when the experience is hard to describe or sounds like what somebody else said, those things get compared and conflated. And those assumptions made it difficult to recognize that things that feel like choices or intentional on some are symptoms in others. And what some people respond well to, like certain organizers or budget tools, won't be as helpful for others. The same way that people have their personal preference between acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and naproxen, although they all have the same goal to help with inflammation and pain. The other issue, though, is that a lot of Western psychology and mental health care was normed on specific demographics. And it's a recent shift that we are treating mental illness from the perspective of helping the person have a better internal experience, when previously goals have been more about regulating or adjusting to a typical norm in society. Because mental health symptoms show up differently in different people in different ways, how they are socialized and the resources they have access to also impact how those symptoms manifest. I'm a millennial, and in my lifetime, there's been a pretty significant shift in how people with both ADHD and autism are identified and diagnosed. A lot of the responsibility is put on educators, and the support they receive helps them navigate students that make their jobs of managing multiple students more difficult. That is why so many people still think of ADHD as the boys who can't sit still disorder, because that was what was disruptive in class. Well, as both a black person and a woman, and also a hint of complex trauma that presents as a tendency to people please, I was socialized to enjoy appeasing authority figures and avoid being a nuisance. So not only did I excel in class, I was a delight, gifted, the teacher's pet. The kid who can't sit still and the kid who is obsessed with being the best are actually both experiencing the same symptom, which is difficulty regulating dopamine levels. But because I got dopamine by being a high achiever, I didn't disrupt the social structure, so it wasn't problematic enough to be recognized as a symptom. And it's only really recently that people have started to have more language to articulate their internal experience and access to other people who can relate that it has started to be recognized that neurodivergence looks differently depending on a number of criteria. It's happened in the last few decades that people even recognize that both AFABs and people of the global majority have symptoms of autism and ADHD, but that they present way differently than anticipated, hence the influx of late diagnosed folks in the last decade. Currently, the terms that feel like the most efficient to describe my experience as both an autistic person and a person with ADHD are high masking with low support needs. There's a history of using labels like high or low functioning, but those prioritize others' experience of the person and often leave the neurodivergent person to feel isolated and unsupported. Because as long as they don't make other people uncomfortable, people around them don't acknowledge the struggles caused by their experience. So when we say masking, we mean the person's capacity for blending in with social and cultural expectations. What we mean when we say low support needs is that there are structures in place in our society that help me navigate certain symptoms, so I can function in daily life without disrupting the flow. However, although I don't cause a super negative impact in those around me, it has had a pretty significant impact on my own internal experience, which explains both how we missed it and why I cared.